Welcome to the presentation here this evening. I'm Dave Fetch. I'm with the Sunridge Group, and we are involved with energy audit programs, both for new houses and for the retrofits. I think it was about a month ago where we did the new home programs, LEED, Energy Star, R2000. Tonight we're going to talk about retrofitting an existing house. What you can do, where you get the information, what's out there for incentives, and we'll try and walk our way through each of those items and try and answer any questions that may come up and see how we make out. So the first thing we want to do is just sort of, if I can get this thing to work, this is all over the internet, and this is a typical house, so whatever typical means. And so you can see where some of the energy losses or heat losses or energy gets lost out of a typical single-family house. Some of it goes through the attic. A fair bit of it goes through the walls, and we'll talk about the difference between attics and walls in just a couple minutes. Some goes out of the windows. Some goes out of the foundation of the basement walls and the basement floor, and some is lost through, through air leakage, drafts and other things like that. Hopefully all of that adds up to 100%. But that's going to vary a lot from house to house, depending on the vintage of your house and what upgrades have been done and a whole bunch of different things like that. So, like I said, this is basically for a typical house, whatever typical means. So in Saskatchewan, a typical house is a lot different than it is in BC, than it is in Ontario or the Atlantic. And so these percentages or ratios are going to be all over the place, depending on your house. And it depends on how big your house is as well. Obviously, with a very large house, the attic might be a lot less than the main walls, and a two-story versus a bungalow, and different configurations like that. This image here basically shows all of the locations around the house where air leakage is a potential thing you want to look at. So you can see what typically happens is we have the building envelope. The building envelope is the exterior shell of the house, and that basically separates the interior conditioned space from the environment, whether it be the air outside or the ground below grade or whatever it happens to be. And so you can see there's air leakage potential openings all over the place, whether it's at the rim joists or whether it's at ducting or whether it's at electrical outlets or vent hoods, or all over the place, windows and doors and all different locations like that. So there's literally hundreds of locations in your building envelope that are potential leakage locations. Every electrical outlet, every light switch, every fan and every light in the attic, or anything that goes through the air barrier. So there's a whole bunch of opportunities for improving that and reducing that component of the heat loss. If we back up, you can see that anywhere from 10%, and that's usually pretty low on an older leaky house. That can be anywhere from 15 to 30% if you have a really drafty house. So air leakage can be a pretty big component of the overall heat loss of your house. Okay? So if you've got a house now, you're living in a house, let's say it's a 1950s house, and you want to do some upgrades, what do? How do you know what to do? First thing lots of people want to do is what?
Windows.
Change the windows, right? Is that the right thing to do? Well, windows, nothing against windows, lots of good reasons for changing windows, but maybe that's not the right thing to do. So the question becomes, how do you know what to do? Do you insulate the basement? Do you actually change the windows? And maybe that is the right thing to do. Do you upgrade your walls? Do you upgrade your attic? What do you end up doing? Just as a side note, why do we put R40 in our attics and R20 in our walls?
Easier. Heat rises.
Any other ideas? There's two more people here. As Ron said, it's easy to do. Heat doesn't rise, warm air rises. Heat goes equally well in all directions. Okay? So the energy, the heat transfer through our ceiling is exactly the same as it is through our walls. The only difference is we usually have more insulation in our attic than in our walls. And the only reason we do that is because it's relatively cheap to install, and we got lots of space to do it. If you look at the walls of this house here, I don't even know what, are they R36?
R60.
R60, sorry about that. You have to stop me for that. The problem with our walls is that most of the way we frame our houses, it's got a structural member, 2x4s or 2x6s every 16 inches on center, and then we have batt insulation installed into that framing cavity. So wherever the insulation is, we usually have a reasonable insulation amount. However, wherever there's structural members, there's not much insulation there because the structural members are conductors, not insulators. And so you get accelerated heat loss wherever there are structural members. We call that thermal bridging. So a 2x6 R20 wall really doesn't perform like an R20, it's more like an R15 to an R17 because of the thermal bridging, okay? And that's one of the benefits of the way this house was built, is that it's a double wall system and there's a whole bunch of insulation either in front of or behind the framing members. And that cuts out the extra heat loss that goes through those framing members. So this is a very superior wall system here. Not only does it have lots of insulation in it, it gets rid of the thermal bridging that most standard framed houses have in them. Okay? And that's another benefit of adding insulation on the exterior, putting foam over the top. We'll talk about that when we're upgrading our walls, or adding and strapping it on the inside. So the only reason, again, the heat loss per square foot through a wall is the same as it is through an attic if it has the same R value, because heat goes equally well in all directions. But it's easy to put 18 inches of insulation up in the attic. It's pretty hard to put 18 inches of insulation in a 2x6 wall. So that's the reason that we typically insulate our attics a lot more than our walls. It's just we're space to do it, cheap to do, and that's why we do it, okay? So, we've got this house. How do you know what to do? As Ron was saying, many people, the first thing they want to do is change their windows because they think it's going to save them a lot of money, and in some cases it can, as far as energy goes. But they're usually looking to change it because the sills are rotted, the cranks are broken, they're drafty, and a whole bunch of other reasons. And like I said, lots of good reasons for changing windows. But in many cases, most energy is lost through other components. So what do? So the thing that our company offers is an energy evaluation. We come into the house and we document all the parameters of the house. We measure up the walls, we measure up the attic and the windows and doors, and we check how much insulation is in each of those components. We do an air tightness test of the house to find out how leaky it is. We document and verify the kind of mechanical equipment in. The ventilation system, does it have heat recovery? The efficiency of the water heater and of the furnace. And all that goes into a software program that the federal government has developed, and that's the basis of the EnerGuide for Houses program that's in place here in Saskatchewan for retrofitting an existing house. I'm just going to walk quickly through what a report looks like, and that will show you as to how you can make some good decisions about where to invest some money, because very few people have unlimited resources. So if you only have $5,000 or $10,000 or $20,000 to invest in upgrading your house, how do you make the decision as to where to go? Do you spend $10,000 or $20,000 in windows? Do you put in a new furnace and add some insulation and spend your money that way? What kind of combinations of things make the most sense to do, and in what order do you do them? Okay? This is what an EnerGuide report looks like. So you can see that all houses in the country are under this program are rated on the ERS system, the energy rating system, and it rates all houses on a scale from 0 to 100. In this particular case, this sample one, the house rates a 51. Now, this rating scale is not like in high school where an 80 and above is an A and that's good. An 80 is a very good house. This house here, because it's on the way on the upper end, is probably up in the 90s and virtually at 100, just about. But most houses are less than 80, and many houses in Saskatchewan are under 60 or 70. And so it's not quite like in grades in high school. So that, like I said, that 80 rating is a pretty high mark to attain, especially for an existing house. When you're building new, it's easier to do, so we tend to see how houses get rated in the 80s. Okay? This is just the first one. It just sort of documents where the current house rates. The second arrow on there is if all of the upgrades that are being recommended in this report are carried out, that's where you could take the house up to. So you could take it from a 51 up to a 79. Okay? And it just shows some details. It's a two-story house. There's 23 windows, no air conditioner, some other details. It's right now 4 air changes. That's the air tightness results, and etc. This will just give you some upgrade points, depending on kind of upgrades that you want to do.
Can you go back that date?
Sure. This is under the old retrofit program that expired in March, and depending on the items that you chose to upgrade, it would assign points, stars to them, and the stars are indicative of the higher savings that are achieved by doing those upgrades. So if you insulated the basement and crawl space, you could get your rating, increase your rating by 9.3 rating points, and you can see that that's on the high end. Whereas if you did something like changing out your domestic hot water, it would give you only 0.6 of a rating point, go from that 51 to 51.6, and it doesn't have as much, and the heating system has 10.7 points. So depending on the upgrade you're doing, it will result in a different number of rating point increases from the base house, which is currently at a 51.
This may be a dumb question, but you could probably figure out the present value of those savings on each of those, right?
We're going to get to that in a minute, because we've developed, in addition to the standard report, and Sunridge has developed our own summary report, which I'll show right at the end as soon as we're through this one here. Yep. And that just shows you the breakdown between space heating, domestic hot water, lights and appliances. And this is in percentages, and we've also got the numbers in gigajoules as well. But this is the item here that I want to point your attention to. You can see that the red line, the red bars, are the current consumptions in gigajoules. So you can see that through the basement, we're losing right now, in this particular house, about 67 gigajoules per year. Through the windows and doors, we're losing about 48 gigajoules per year. Through the walls, about 46, and through the ceilings, just under 10, about 9. And then this is for ventilation and air leakage, and that's coming in between 35 and 40. So you can see the different components in the house and how many gigajoules or how much energy we're losing through each of those. And so the longer this graph, this bar here, maybe those are the things that you should put, that would be the thing you'd focus on first, because that's where most of the energy is going. In combination with that, you have to figure out how much is it going to cost me to save that energy. Let's assume that we can cut this basement heat loss in half and save 30 gigajoules, let's say. How much investment is it going to take to save those 30 gigajoules per year? And that will sort of give you a return on your investment, right? Now you can do the same thing for the walls or the windows or whatever. So if you're going to cut the windows consumption in half, from 48 down to 24, let's say, how many dollars to replace all the windows in your house is it going to cost you to save those 24 gigajoules per year? So there's where you can now sort of prioritize what things make the most sense to do based on how much you're going to save and how much it's going to cost you to save that energy, right? In Saskatchewan right now, I think we're paying for natural gas $7, $8 gigajoule, give or take. Could be wrong in that, but it's in that range, I believe. It's less than 10 and it's more than 5, I'm pretty sure, so somewhere in that range. So we can assign numbers to that, and I've got a chart in the back there where we've got actual utility costs in our software, and it's predicting sorry, what it's costing you or what you can save by doing a particular upgrade. All right? So if you don't know what is the best thing to do, this EnerGuide evaluation can give you the answers to that and help you make the decision. If I've got $10,000 or $20,000 to invest, where is the best to invest in? And usually you would start with the thing with the highest heat loss and then work your way down. You can see in this particular case you're losing less than 10 gigajoules per year. That's about $100 or less than $100. So to insulate your attic, and costing you $500 to do that, it's going to take a long time to pay that back, right? Because you can only cut it in half or something like that. So you have to look at savings and investment as to try and make some decisions. Here is the extra report that Sunridge does as part of the EnerGuide evaluations, and here's where we summarize things. You can see right now the house is rating 51. If you did all of the upgrades, it would rate a 79. But let's look at it component by component. Right now, if we were to increase the attic insulation to an R50, we would estimate that it's going to save $73 a year based on that